Right. Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. Tonight we're going to be learning Maseches Yoma, Daf Samech Daled. A clean sugya and far less complicated than last night's Gemara, Baruch Hashem. And before we look at our Gemara on Samech Daled, I would just ask that you join me on the bottom of Samech Beis Amud Aleph at the beginning of the new parak. This new parak is called Shnei Seirei. And at the end of that Mishnah, I should say in the middle of that Mishnah, we had a line. We were talking about what happens if the animals, if one of the Shnei Seirim die. So if you look in the middle of that Mishnah, it says, V'mishehigril meis, if after the goral is done, one of the animals dies. So how do you solve that problem? So the Mishnah there recommended, Yavi zug acher, bring another two Seirim. So your first two, one of them died, so only one remains. Bring another two, total of four, one dead. Now bring another two, Yavi zug acher, v'yagir lalem b'tchila, v'yomar, im shel shem meis v'chule, fine. And then what do? Look 5 lines from the bottom. The hasheni, the one that's left over from the hagrala, it's yira ad she'yista'iv. It's yira ad she'yista'iv. He says that second one should go into the, it just basically wait out its life until it gets a mum. But we don't know which second one. We had animal 1 and animal 2. Sir Lashem, Sir Lazazel, one of them died. So then we said, fine, dead one, live one. Get another healthy pair and do the go-row. Whatever was missing, we use, but then the second one we throw out. We just let it graze. From which pair are we doing the second one? This is a machlokas in the Amoraim. And this brings us to the top of Samech Daled Amud Aleph at the 2 dots, 5 lines down. So im shel shem meis, if the one that died was of the was the Seir LaHashem, so then Zesha Allah v'chule, referencing our Mishnah about that second animal. What do we do with it? So says the Gemara. Omar Rav, he says, Sheni shebezug rishon yikrav, the second animal of the first pair, namely the remaining living animal, that is the one that gets to be karev. And Sheni shebezug sheni yireh, and of the new pair that you came to bring together behagrala to replace the missing one, so that one is yirah she'isai. That's what our Mishnah meant. However, Rav Yochanan sharply disagrees. Rav Yochanan says, Amar, Sheni shebezug rishon yira, the opposite. The second animal of the first pair, meaning the remaining living one, doesn't get karev. It has to live out its life grazing until it gets a mum. And Sheni shebezug sheni yikrav. And the animal from the second pair drops into the first pair and is actually karev. It's part of the avod on Yom Kippur. So what is this machlokas? About 9 lines down or so, Samech Daled Amud Aleph, b'mai kamiflage. What are Rav and Rav Yochanan arguing about? Says the Gemara very cleanly, Rav savar ba'alei chayim einon nidachin, that when an animal is alive, it cannot be nidach. What does this mean that it can't be nidach? It can't be closed out of a korban? It means as follows. We had our zug, we had our shnei seirim. Both were healthy. One of them died. The remaining one it cannot be nidcha. You can't cancel out the remaining one. There's nothing wrong with that animal. The fact that it was appointed behagrala to be either the Seir LaHashem or the Seir LaZazel, that's fine. But it does not mean, and it should not mean, that it gets excluded from a korban because it's like oile rasha oile shcheno. No, not oile rasha oile shcheno. Because Rav holds ba'alei chayim eino nidachim. If the animal's alive and there's nothing wrong with the animal, there's no reason why it can't be karev. If it's alive, it cannot be pushed out of being a korban. The Rav Yochanan savar ba'alei chayim nidachim. He argues that yes, it can be poisoned. It's just the well is poisoned by its partner, and because its partner Seir died, therefore this one is nidachim. My time of the Rav. Why is it that Rav holds that when it comes to, why is it that Rav holds, what does Rav hold? Why is it that Rav holds that Ba'alei Chaim are Einon Nidachin, that an animal that is all well and healthy cannot be pushed off just because its partner died? So says the Gemara, we're going to hear 2 answers here. The first will be rejected. The first is the Yalif mi Mechusar Zman. Maybe, says the Gemara, that Rav learns his opinion, the Ba'alei Chaim Einon Nidachin. Maybe he learns that from Mechusar Zman. Yesterday we referenced this sugya of Mechusar Zman. Mechusar Zman is a halachic issue when an animal is not yet old enough to be karev. It's less than 8 days old. Says the Gemara, how would this svara work? Mechusar Zman lavaf al gav dahashta lo chazi. Right now, the animal is not fit for anything because it's too young. Ki hadar michsi shapir dami. But when it does get old enough, when it's 9 days old, when it's 10 days old, it can be karev. Hachanami loshna. So what do we see? What's the comparison here with between the what the Gemara calls Ba'alei Chaim Einon Nidachin and this new case of Mechusar Zman? So it says the Gemara, there's a time when it's good and a time when it's not good. So by our case, there's a time when it's good. That's before before its partner died. Now that its partner died, now it's not good. And the same is true by Mechusar Zman. There's a time when it's not good, which is before the animal turns 8 days old. And there's a time when it is good, which is after the animal is that old. So it says the Gemara, no way. 1/3 of the way down. Mi dummy. Can you really compare these two cases together? The case of Ba'alei Chaim Einon Nidachin and the case of Mechusar Zman. Hasam, over there, by the case of Mechusar Zman, that case is lo ischazi klal. That animal is a total zero. If you do shchita on an animal that's 5 days old, it's like doing on a bris on a baby that's 5 days old. It's a zero. Cut its toenails. It has the same halachic ramifications. It is not a bris. Here too, it is not a korban. So it says the Gemara, when we're talking about Mechusar Zman, the animal before that age of 8 days old is nothing. And hacha, but here, in our case, it's nirev and nidche. First, when the two animals were alive, both animals were perfect. Only now that its partner Seir died does it become problematic. And therefore, apples and oranges. These two cases cannot be compared. Ella, therefore, what then is the reason why Rav holds that Ba'alei Chaim Einon Nidachin, that an animal that's alive cannot be excluded just because its partner in crime died? Says the Gemara, Elohaina Taimu Derav, what is his rationale? What's his precedent for this idea? The Yalif mi Balmum Over, because he learns out from the halachic sugya of a Balmum Over. A Balmum Over is an animal that has a blemish, but it's a temporary blemish. It will pop up and then it will go away. But while it's a blemish, it cannot be used. So says the Gemara, what's the svara here? How does Rav articulate the comparison between Ba'alei Chaim Einon Nidachin and between the case of Balmum Over? So says the Gemara, Balmum Over, when it comes to an animal that has a temporary blemish, lavafal gav, isn't it the case to lo chazi hashta, that right now it's not okay because right now it has a mum, but ki hadar michzi shapir dami, but when the animal heals from its temporary wound, so then from its blemish, then it's fine. Hachanami lo shna. Then we should say the same exact thing over here, and the Gemara then accepts this as Rav's reason. So let's summarize. We have a machlokes when we have a pair of animals, the shnei seirim, and unfortunately one of them dies. So then the halacha is we bring a second pair, and whichever one is missing is the one that gets replaced. But which pair do we use? Do we use the two on the top, or do we use both of the replacement animals, or do we use the one that's missing and we drop it down with its pair from the original? So we have one original and one new. So that's a machlokes Rav and Rav Yochanan. And Rav's opinion, he says, the reason why Rav says that the animal that is Yira Ad She'istaiv is the one from the new is because of this principle that he says of Ba'alei Chaim Einon Nidach.
Maddie, here, you want this money?
Is from Balmum Over. That brings us to the halfway point on the page. It says the Gemara, Balmum Over can come back into play. It's like when a player twists his ankle, he gets benched for a couple of minutes, and when he feels like he's strong enough, if he's strong enough, he'll come back into the game. So the Gemara says, V'hasa minalan. How do we know that a Balmum Over, that an animal that has a temporary blemish, can be called back into play? Who says? Maybe once he has a blemish of any kind, even if it's temporary, maybe we should assume he is now out of the running to be brought to the mizbeach. So says the Gemara, mum bam. That's what the pasuk says, that there's a mum bam. What does that mean? Mum bam hu delo yeratzu. When there's a mum in the animal, that's when it's not ratzui. That's when it should not be included on the mizbeach. But ha'avar muman yeratzu. But when and if the mum of this animal, the blemish of the animal disappears, then yeratzu, then it can then be considered acceptable for the Beis Hamikdash, for the Mizbeach. So if that's true, says the Gemara, now we have a very strong pasuk, a very strong drasha and a brisa. Doesn't say it's a brisa actually, but we do have a drasha that indicates that Rav is right, that the Balmum Over can be brought back in, and if the Balmum Over can be brought back in, then really Rav Yochanan should agree with Rav, because Rav's Mari Makom is beautiful. So says the Gemara of Rav Yochanan. So when we see these dialogues, basically every time we see the next person's name, it says, what are you going to do with this problem? Rav Yochanan, what are you going to do about the drasha? So Rav Yochanan answers as follows. You're right, mi'ed Rachmana, but mi'ed Rachmana bahem. the Torah specifically only included the following. It included the world of Baal Mum Over, that it can be taken out of play and be brought back into play. Heim hu dechi avar muman yeratzu. Only there by Baal Mum Over can it be brought back in, because that's what the pasuk was talking about. But hakol dechuyan, in any other case where an animal was dachu, it was pushed out of being eligible for hakrava. Hoil the nidchu. Once the animal's kicked out, the animal's kicked out. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan now is an excellent svar, because he says the word bahem teaches me that, Rav, you said that the Baal Mum Over I brought out of play, brought back into play. So therefore, in our case, we should say like Rav holds. Says Rabbi Yochanan, no, the Gemara said, the pasuk says the word bahem. And because the pasuk says the word bahem, so because it says bahem, so therefore, no, Rav, this only applies to your world of Baal Mum Over, but it doesn't apply anywhere else. So then says the Gemara, Rav, what's Rav going to do with it? What does Rav do with the word bahem? So it says Rav, hahu bahem. That word bahem is be'einai hu delo mirtzu. In and of itself, the Baal Mum Over, if it was already shechted, cannot be brought. However, ha'al yedei ta'aroves mirtzu. But if the body parts were mixed up with, if the Baal Mum Over body parts were mixed up with regular body parts of an animal that is a tamim, then all is well. Keditran, halfway down, a little bit more than halfway down, samach daled amud aleph. What does the Mishnah write? If you have a mixture of evarim tamimim be'evarim ba'alei mumin, you have a mixture of limbs of animals that were tamim, no blemishes, and it's mixed with limbs that have blemishes. Machlokes in the Tanaim. Rabbi Eliezer Omer im karev harosh al echad mehen yakrivu kol haroshen kulan. That if you have one head of an animal, you can bring all the heads of the animal, a mixture of those which are tamimim and those which are ba'alei mumin. Kirav shel echad mehen. If you have 1 foot of one of the animals and yakrivu kol akraim kulan, then you can bring a mixture of all of the feet. Chachamim omrim afilu karvu kulan chutz me'echad mehen yotza lebeis hasreifa. No matter what, everything is going to get burnt. So the first shita that we just learned, Rabbi Eliezer, is like Rav. Rav says, what does the word bahem teach us? Rav says that the word bahem teaches us that you are allowed to take a mixture of parts of an animal that are tamim and parts of an animal that are baalei mum and mix them together. That's what the word bahem was used for in the pasuk. And therefore, the word bahem cannot be used as Rav Yochanan used it, which was to say that the whole idea of baalei mum and over coming back into play was only true by baalei mum and over, because you can't say that anymore because of the word bahem. So then v'idach, last short line on samach daled amud aleph, v'idach, you Rabbi Yochanan, what then do you do with this drasha? So says the Gemara, nafkale mi bam and bahem. He agrees to that distinction. He agrees to what Rav was teaching in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, that we are allowed to mix the body parts of evarim tamimin and evarim baalei mumin, but it's not from the word bahem, it's from the letter hey in the word bahem. It's not the whole word. And the letter hey is bam. It just could have said bam, mi bam bahem, because there's an extra letter. So therefore, we are able to learn it from there. And therefore, the word as a whole is available for the drasha to teach that only when it comes to Baal Mum Over can a Baal Mum Over be taken out of play and be brought back in. And that is how he gets out of this problem. V'idach, you, Rav, okay, he's got a good answer. Rav Yochanan is doing good. So how do you get out of this? V'idach, first of the long lines, bam bahem lo darish. That's not the type of drasha that Rav would make. He doesn't believe that the letter hey was extraneous in the Torah, and he therefore will not make a drasha. So what do we see from here? Summarizing and distilling what we've learned in this section of the Gemara. We had asked, how do we know that a Baal Mum Over could be precedent for our case of Baalei Mumin Einon Nidachin? So Rav said the reason why I know that is because of the pasuk, and in short, the drasha matches. Rav is able to navigate the dialogue with Rav Yochanan in order to figure out how the psukim work just so perfectly that we end up saying that Baalei Mumin Over are the perfect example. They are the precedent in the Torah of an animal that's taken out of play and brought back in. The same would be true by our case of Baalei Chaim Einon Nidachin, that when the two animals were behagrala and one died, so the one that is alive can't be brought till it has its match. So it's out of play till it gets its match, and then it can be brought back in. That is the shita of Rav. But then the Gemara asks a really great question. It's just a very logical question. Now Rav, if you look at Rav Shita is 5 lines down from the top of the page. What did Rav say? Rav said that the animal that goes out into to graze until it gets a mum was the second animal of the new pair that was brought to replace the dead animal. So we had the 2 animals that were initially brought behagrala and one died. Then we brought a new pair, the substitute pair. So you're going to take one from there to replace the missing one. The other one, that other one from the new pair, that one goes out to be mistaiv. And what was Rav's answer? It has to go out to graze because we hold the Bali Chaim ein nidachin, because you're not allowed to throw out the first one. So as to ask the Gemara as follows: Ula Rav, I don't understand. First of the long lines, Nihi nami, I really do. I get it, says the Gemara, the Bali Mumin ein nidachin. I understand that Bali Mumin ein nidachin, and therefore, in the original pair of the Seirim, when one of the animals die, the other one doesn't necessarily get excluded. But it also doesn't have to be that animal. Oh, you're just saying that it's one of the options. Says the Gemara, Iboy hai nakriv, Iboy hai nakriv. It's not mukhrach that it has to be this animal, which is behakrava, that the animal from the first pair is behakrava, and the animal from the second pair, the replacement pair, is yirad sheistayv. Could be either animal. All Rav's answer does is it frees up both animals to either be behakrava or yirad sheistayv. So the Gemara says, how did Rav choose? And now we're going to see a Gemara we're familiar with. Amar Rava, Rav Savar Laki Rav Yossi Damar Mitzvah Berishon. You're right. You are correct when it comes to the svar that Rav gave about Bali Chaim Ein Nidachin, and therefore the only alive animal from the first pair can be used, but it doesn't have to be used. You're right. It could have been the other animal as well. Why then did Rav pick that the first animal, the only living animal from the first pair, should be brought? Because he holds mitzvah berishon, that once an animal is identified for a mitzvah, that is when that animal should forever be used unless otherwise noted. And because Baalei Chaim Ein Nidachin, according to Rav, because the animal is eligible, therefore we couple that with this halacha of mitzvah berishon, and therefore that is the animal that is brought behakrava, the remaining living animal from the first set of animals from the Gorah. So this is an idea we learned before in the name of Rabbi Yossi, and the Gemara, until the end of the page, is going to repeat the same dialogue we saw a few blot ago. Hey, Rabbi Yossi, which opinion of Rabbi Yossi is the Marimakom from which we learn that it's mitzvah berishon? You want to say mitzvah berishon? That's great. Okay, so therefore we're going to use the remaining living animal from the first pair. Give me a marimakom. How do we know that this is true? So inema, if you want to say that it's Rabbi Yossi de kupos, that it's the Rabbi Yossi from the Mishnah that speaks about the kupos, the buckets that were inside a special lishka that held the coins of the chatzi shekel, and it's none. What is the Mishnah right there? Fourth line of the wide lines. Shalosh kupos shel shalosh sayin shebahen tormen es alishka because of alein aleph beis gimel. We said there were 3 large containers in this room. Each of them were filled with coins, the chatzi shekel, and it said on them aleph beis and gimel. The first one said aleph, of course, and then beis and gimel to identify which box. V'tanya, and the Brisa writes in regards to this Mishnah, it says in the name of Rabbi Yossi, Amar Rabbi Yossi, lama kasav alein aleph beis gimel. Rabbi Yossi says, why did we need to write on the boxes? Just go in and take the coins. Why did we have to identify which box was which? So says the Gemara, Leda eze mehen nitra marishon lahavi hemen arishon shem mitzvah berishon. So maybe we should say that Rav, who specifically identified that the first animal that was available should be karev and not from the second pair, the remaining living one from the first pair and neither from the second pair, maybe we should say that the marimakom to support this idea is this Mishnah about the kupos, the mitzvah berishona. So it says the Gemara lav dafka. Dilma shiny hasa, maybe that case is different because to be idna di ischaze kamaisa lo ischaze basraisa. Maybe only the first ones were really fit to be used. Only the first ones had coins in it. Maybe the second ones didn't have them yet for whatever the reason, a whole host of reasons. But maybe the first one, the first aleph, the aleph box was ready to be used, and the beis wasn't ready. So it's not because mitzvah berishon. It was a logistical issue as to why we took up the box that said aleph instead of beis. Therefore, the Gemara says you're right. 3 lines from the bottom. It must therefore be that the source that Rav Yossi uses to indicate that we hold mitzvah berishona is as follows. Ella, it must be Rabbi Yossi de Pesach. The Tanya, the Brisa writes, Hamafresh pischo ve'avad, a person separates out an animal for his korban Pesach, and then unfortunately he loses the animal. Hifresh acher tachtav, and then he separates another animal. So he had a korban Pesach 1 and he lost it. He purchased korban Pesach 2. Then ve'acher kachnim sarishan. Then he found korban Pesach 1. Now he's stuck. He's got 2 animals. V'arei shnei and omdin. He's got both animals in front of him. So what should he do? Which animal is karev? Eza mehen sheyirtze yakriv divrei chachamim. The first sheet in the Mishnah, in this brisa, that's the sheet of the chachamim you can pick. It doesn't make a difference. Either one you'll be yotze. But Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold that way, and this is the sheet that we're looking for. Rabbi Yossi Omer mitzvah berishon, explicitly that we have a mitzvah to bring the first one. So that's the animal that you initially purchased but lost and found again. That animal is the one that's karev. However, even Rabbi Yossi does have a caveat. The im, top of Samach Dalet Amud Beis. We're going to go until 3-4 lines before the end of the page. The im haya hasheni muvchar mimenu yavienu. However, if the animal, the replacement animal of the Korban Pesach was nicer, so then under those circumstances, you're allowed to bring that one. However, it is mitzvah berishona.
Oh.
So what do we see from here? We had asked a question against Rav. According to Rav, who holds Baalei Chaim Eina Nidachin, therefore, either of the two animals that can be used. It could either be the only living one from the first pair or its component in the second pair. It could be either one. Your principle of Baalei Chaim Einan, that they're Einan Nidachin, all that does is free up both animals to be candidates. So why then did Rav say it should be the first animal? The answer is because he holds like Rabbi Yossi, mitzvah berishona. What is the Mari Makom that supports Rabbi Yossi's shita? That is this brisa that we just learned from Maseches Psachim, that if you lose an animal and then you replace it and then you find the one you lost, that the initial one is given because mitzvah berishona. Says the Gemara on the top of Samach Dalet Amud Beis, who's right? Achlokas Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, who's right? So here we have a bit of a problem. Amar Rava, Deka Masnisen Kavase de Rav. Our Mishnah seems to indicate, like the opinion of Rav, Ubraisa Kavase de Rabbi Yochanan. And the Braisa seems to support Rabbi Yochanan. Let's just pause for a second. Over the course of our learning, we often distinguish between a Braisa and a Tosefta and a Mishnah. And there's a reason for that. And that is because there's a pecking order. A Mishnah they're both equals in regards to arguing from one another. They're equals in that way. They're side to side, they're lateral. However, when it comes to Psak Halacha, if you have a case like this where a Braisa supports one opinion and a Mishnah supports another, and that's all you have, we would paskin like the Mishnah over the Braisa. That's why this Gemara is very important to show this distinction, and why in our shiur we often distinguish between them, because when it comes to Psak Halacha, there needs to be a rank in regards to which sources in the Tanaim, which one is more precious than the other. Let's learn this out. So it says the Gemara, third line, Mas Nisan Kavase de Rav. Our Mishnah is like the opinion of Rav. Dekatani, what does it say in our Mishnah? Let's just look at the Pashut language of our Mishnah. You can look back in our Mishnah or right here. Samach Beis Amud Aleph is where the Mishnah is. Samach Aleph, I can remember where it is a couple of blot ago. Im shel shem meis, if of the two animals that were in the Goral, the one that is shel shem meis, the one that is the Seir LaHashem. So then, Zeh she'olav alav Goral l'shem yiskayim tachtav. Look at the language. Then when we bring the replacement pair, it is replaced. What does that seem to imply? That we just drop in the Seir Lashem down and you're good to go. And what did Rav hold? That the Sheni, the match of the replacement, the remaining one, that's the one that's Yirachi Stayib. The Idach Kedekaikai, the other animal, whatever, it just lives out its life. So our Mishnah seems to be Meduyak, like the opinion of Rav. Braisa, however, when it comes to the Braisa, that's Kavase de Rav Yochanan. How so? What does the Braisa say? Well, the Braisa is very, very, very explicit. The Katani, the Braisa says Sheni. When our Mishnah says Sheni, what does it mean Sheni? Eini Yodea im Sheni shebezug rishon. I don't know when you say Sheni that it goes out to be rowed, to graze. I don't know if you're talking about the second animal of the first pair or im Sheni shebezug Sheni. Which animal are we talking about that's going to go out and graze? I have no idea. Says the Braisa, Kishehu Omer Ya'amod Chai V'lo Shechavero Meis, that when the pasuk says Ya'amod Chai, it should be standing and it should be alive, and it should be when its chaver was not dead. So between the two pairs, the first pair had a chaver that was dead. The second pair had a chaver that was not dead, because the second pair was a replacement pair. Therefore, my mashma, says the Gemara, a third of the way down, Ya'amod Chai V'lo Shekvar Amad. It has to be that it is still currently alive, both animals in the pair. Therefore, that's how Rav Yochanan knew which animal should go out to graze. Tanan, the Gemara asks a question from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah then quotes the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Ve'odam Rabbi Yehuda. We learn the following din from Rabbi Yehuda at the end of our Mishnah. Nishbach Adam Yamus HaMishtaleach. That if the blood spilled of the Seir LaHashem right before the Zrikas Adam was to take place, the halacha is Yamus HaMishtaleach. Then you can't use the Seir Mishtaleach like you were supposed to push it off the cliff. That animal has to live out its life and die. And on the flip side, Meis HaMishtaleach, if the Seir LaAzazel drops dead, then the halacha is Yishbach Hadam. You're not allowed to do Zrikas Hadam. So asks the Gemara on this line of Rabbi Yehuda. Hold on one second. Bishlam ala Rabbi Yochanan. I understand this statement of Rabbi Yehuda according to Rabbi Yochanan, Da'amar Ba'alei Chayim Nidachin, because he says that animals can be Nidachin. So they're interconnected. When one animal dies, it impacts the other. When the Seir La Hashem, the blood is spilled, and there's no more blood to do Zrikas Hadam, you have to take the Seir La Azazel and let it live out its life. They're interconnected. You can't use them. That's the shita Ba'alei Chayim Nidachin, is that they get brushed out of the category of Hakrava. So when one animal dies, these two animals are interconnected. The other is going to be crippled. So I understand Rav Yochanan's shita. A little bit more than halfway down, 10 lines up. Samach Daled Amud Beis. Ela l'Rav de'amar Ba'alei Chayim eina nidachin. But according to Rav, who says that Ba'alei Chayim eina nidachin, that even if Seir La Hashem, for example, dies, so what? Ba'alei Chayim eina nidachin. We don't exclude an animal that has nothing wrong with it. But if that's true, then why did Rabbi Yehuda say, Amai yamus hamishtaleach? If the Seir La Hashem, the blood spilled, why do I have to let the other animal die? If Rav holds that Ba'alei Chayim eina nidachin, that you can't remove the essence of this. There's nothing wrong with the animal. It's fine. So why would Rav say this if Rabbi Yehuda says otherwise? So says the Gemara, it's very simple. Because Rabbi Yehuda is not the only shita in the Mishnah. Amar lach Rav, aliba de Rabbi Yehuda, lo ka'amina. My shita is not in the camp of Rabbi Yehuda. I was speaking ki amina liba de Rabbanan. So then the Gemara says, wow, okay, that's a really good answer. In fact, it's such a good answer. We need to flip the question. We asked first against Rav. Now we need to ask against Rav Yochanan. Bishlam ala Rav b'ha pligi Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanan. I understand according to Rav. It seems to be that our Mishnah has a machlokas. Do we say Ba'alei Chayim Nidachin or do we say Ba'alei Chayim Eina Nidachin? Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that Ba'alei Chayim Nidachin, they're interconnected, and therefore if one dies, it ruins the other. But Rav is following the sheet of the Chachamim, the Ba'alei Chayim Eina Nidachin, and therefore no reason to throw out that animal. All is well. So that explains Bishlam ala Rav b'ha pligi Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanan, and Rav is just following the sheet of the Chachamim who holds like him. Ela Rav Yochanan, but according to Rav Yochanan, who holds that Ba'alei Chayim are Nidachin, then what's the machlokas in the Mishnah between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda? But my pligi, they agree. They agree. If you're saying that be'etzem the halacha is within the Chachamim, if that's what's happening, is that within the Chachamim, even Rabbi Yochanan will say Ba'alei Chayim Nidachin, then the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda hold the same thing. My pligi. Therefore, says the Gemara, and we'll close with this today. Amar Rava. Ha'amrinan, that was my point I said earlier, said Rava. That's why we said at the top of the page that our Mishnah seems to be like the Shita of Rav. Because when our Mishnah is explained within the Shita of Rav, we understand the split in the Tanaim. The Chachamim hold Ba'alei Chayim Eina Nidachim, and Rav can follow in their footsteps as an Amora. And the other Shita of Yehuda holds Ba'alei Chayim Nidachim. That's great. That's Rav Yochanan. But if our whole Mishnah, the gestalt of our Mishnah is like Rav Yochanan, the Ba'alei Chayim Eina Nidachim, then there's no machlokas in the Tanaim. Then they're all saying the same thing. So something's got to be wrong. That is just a stronger aspect as to how we know that our Mishnah is like the Shita of Rav. And we will pick up within this sugya tomorrow, right here, 3 lines from the bottom of the page on Samach Daled Amud Beis. I am traveling tomorrow. Mir Hashem, I should be here on time. If something changes, I will pre-record and post, but I don't anticipate that. Wishing you all a beautiful night.